TuffStudds. Heavy equipment. Expensive to own, expensive to operate, expensive to maintain. Digging, scooping, loading, crushing, and holding rocks, stones, gravel, and sand will quickly wear down machinery. For added protection, many companies apply wear-resistant components to their equipment, including hard-facing. Of all the hard-facing available, TuffStudds are the best and easiest to install. TuffStudds are a chromium, carbide-laden, wear-resistant alloy, which can be easily welded onto castings or most mild steel and AR plates, including manganese, with a lightweight stud welding gun. Augers, buckets, crushers, chutes, and dozer blades are just a few of the many pieces of equipment that TuffStudds can protect better than any other hard-faced or mechanically attached components. TuffStudds, based on a cross-sectional area, only cover 30% of the area to be protected. 70% is a dead bed of material wearing on itself, the best wear protection possible. TuffStudds weld easily. Depending on the surface, a welder can weld up to 5 TuffStudds a minute, up to 20 pounds per hour. What's more, welding TuffStudds with a stud welding process produces minimal fumes, smoke, and heat input into the base material compared to conventional methods such as hard-facing and conventional welding. All that is required is a stud welding system, which includes a stud welding gun, weld and control cables, ground cable, and TuffStudds. Welding is easy. Put in a stud, hold the gun against the surface, and pull the trigger. Presetting the welding parameters of time and amperage makes it a semi-automatic process. The weld arc shuts off automatically. Now, let's slow down the action and more closely look at what happens. Pulling the trigger starts the pilot arc and lifts the stud. The welding current melts the tip of the stud and the surface you are welding it to. Almost immediately, the gun plunges the stud into the molten pool. Holding it in position for 1 or 2 seconds allows enough time for the cooling metal to solidify, binding the stud to the base material in one strong, full cross-section weld. Before you start welding, let's review some safety points. First, review the codes. It's your responsibility to know and comply with all safety codes that have anything to do with installing and operating a stud welding system. Second, wear fireproof clothing. It will protect you from any weld spatters and berries. Third, eye protection is a must. For short welding sessions, we recommend spectacle frames fit with side shields and a number 3 lens. For longer welding sessions, a full-face tinted shield is recommended. Fourth, play it safe and remove all combustible materials from the welding area. Fifth, clean the surface of all debris, scale, and moisture before you weld. TuffStudds should be applied on smooth, dry surfaces. Light grinding or wire brushing may be sufficient. Preheat when temperatures are below 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius, or base material has work hardened. Now let's get started. The following is extremely important. Setting up the welding gun. First, firmly tap the chuck into place, without the stud in the chuck. Second, screw the footpiece into the legs of the gun. Third, fit the ferrule grip into the footpiece, aligning the holes and set screws. Fourth, insert a TuffStud into the chuck. Fifth, fit the ferrule into the ferrule grip. Sixth, check the shield for centered position. Seventh, check the plunge length. For best results, extend the shoulder of the stud 1/8 of an inch beyond the tip of the ceramic arc shield. That is the thickness of the Allen wrench used to set the leg screws. If it needs adjustment, raise or lower the ceramic arc shield by loosening the leg screws and slide the legs in or out to adjust the length of plunge. Set the welding power supply. The welding arc melts the base metal and the tip of the stud. The heat of the arc is a product of amperage, time, and voltage. The correct amperage level and length of time in relation to the diameter of the stud will ensure good quality welds. 5/8 inch TuffStudds will require about 900 amps and between 6 and 7/10 of a second. 3/4 inch TuffStudds about 1100 amps and between 7 and 9/10 of a second. 7/8 inch TuffStudds about 1300 amps and between 8/10 and 1 second. Every box of TuffStudds has an insert showing the range of amperage and time for that particular stud. Always start at the midpoint of range. Both the amperage and time length settings mentioned are a starting point for the first welds. Try these settings to find the best weld. When adjustments are required, make minor adjustments. Adjust time or amperage separately to achieve the best level for full fusion welds. Do not adjust both at the same time. Insufficient amperage, time length, and plunge length will result in poor welds. Optimum time and power levels plus good plunge length will result in fully fused studs, studs more than able to withstand the heaviest of blows. Quality control check. Strike the welded stud 2 to 3 times with a 3-pound hammer. If the stud does not come out of the base material, the weld is good. You can then proceed to production welding. If the stud comes out of the base material, it indicates a cold weld. You will need to increase the time or amperage until good quality welds are achieved. A preheat of 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius may be necessary due to work-hardened base material. Due to the hardness of TuffStudds, it is possible to fracture a TuffStud with enough force applied. This is the nature of very hard materials and should not be a concern. Now let's weld. Downhand welding. Slowly depress the gun until the ceramic arc shield is flush up against the plate and gently pull the trigger. To assess the quality of your welds, check the fillet of molten metal at the base of the stud. Fillets between 3/16 and 1/4 of an inch thick indicate complete fusion. Side hand welding. Hold the gun carefully. If the bottom of the ceramic arc shield is not held up tightly against the base material, the molten metal will run out of the weld zone. If you can't keep the stud flush against the surface, then leave a slight gap between the top of the ceramic arc shield and the weld base. That will prevent any of the molten metal from leaking out. If you are side hand welding a large number of TuffStudds, it's hard not to avoid at least a couple of them leaking molten metal. Weld from the bottom to the top, avoiding metal drip onto surfaces you are about to weld. Overhead welding. TuffStudds are easy to apply overhead. Just be careful and guard against any molten metal by always wearing proper headgear, safety shields, and leather jacket and gloves. We recommend only the 5/8 inch TuffStudds be welded overhead. The pattern. Always make sure you have an offset pattern, ferrule to ferrule, which effectively blocks all free-flowing material. Using the ceramic arc shield as a spacer will ensure a good, tight pattern. The tighter the pattern, the better the deadbed. In some areas, you might want the studs packed even closer together. If that's the case, just remove the ceramic shield after welding each stud. Welding on different surfaces. Remember to clean the surface you are going to weld. Rough grind or use an electric wheel brush. Sometimes you have no other choice but to weld on an uneven surface or one that is covered with worn-out TuffStudds. The depression on rough and previously welded arc surfaces can make it next to impossible to flush up the arc shield. A poor plunge length will result in a thin and inadequate fillet. Nevertheless, good welds are possible with all sizes of TuffStudds, downhand or sidehand, by extending the plunge length. In the overhead position, only use 5/8 inch TuffStudds. Try an adjustment of 1/16 of an inch to start, then more if the weld doesn't hold. The resulting weld is just as strong as any you can make on the smoothest surfaces. On surfaces previously welded with TuffStudds, either weld in between the studs or directly on top of the worn stud. Welding TuffStudds is easy. Depending, of course, on the surface, A welder can install, on average, up to 5 TuffStudds a minute. If your production rate is below the mark, here are some suggestions that will help you reach it. First, make yourself comfortable by arranging your welding gun, TuffStudds, and arc shields around you so they are easy to get at. Second, wear tight-fitting gloves. They will help you pick up and position the studs and arc shields. Third, establish a pattern and tackle it with a smooth, steady pace. Before we leave you, one final thing: your training manual. Besides detailing all the points we've discussed, the manual provides some good information on special materials. If after reviewing the tape and the manual, you still have some questions about welding TuffStudds, then feel free to contact your TuffStudds team.